I'm Dina Strasser. I teach 7th grade in upstate New York. I have so many questions. I think I'll jump in with Brad's comment that teacher buy-in is ineffective if it's buying into the status quo, which is what you said. Have I paraphrased that correctly?
No, I think the right paraphrase is that direction in teacher buy-in matters.
Okay. So my question then would be, what measures that direction? Something that has been downplayed on this panel, I think beneficially, the things you're talking about are marvelous. I mean, when you're talking about master teachers coming in and the focus group saying that they prefer master teachers to come in and give feedback, that stuff makes tears come to my eyes, literally. But what has been downplayed for me is the presence of standardized teacher scores in these evaluations. As my understanding is that 50% of a teacher's eval in the DC public schools rests on standardized scores. And from my perspective and from the perspective of many colleagues I work with, that is a deal breaker in terms of teacher buy-in. You can get your national cert, you can do survey monkeys with your students and get tremendous feedback about how well they feel they've been taught. They can demonstrate their reading proficiency in their logs to you, but none of that shows up, or perhaps necessarily even has an impact on you as a teacher if 50% of what you are working on is your teacher scores, is your standardized evaluation scores. And I'd like all of you to address that, if you wouldn't mind.
I'm actually happy. I'm happy to take that one on, and I think that there's a couple of pathologies in our sector, and what we have to do is to wrestle our way past them. Okay. I've been on a lot of really great teams in my career, and never once when I was on a great team did people use the word power. And never once did people use the phrase deal breaker. And in fact, when I've been on good teams, what they've done is they've said, we've got a thorny problem with which to wrestle. Let's wrestle with it together. And so to this point, the department has been really clear. In Race to the Top states, we want to be able to use student performance data as a significant portion of a teacher's evaluation. Some state policymakers have decided to strike a number on that. Some local policymakers have decided to strike a number on that. I think that there is a lot to be said for being clear. So when people make a policy with a number struck in it, they're at least benefiting from being clear. But I think even once you've got that number there, you're going to have to actually wrestle with, okay, how do we accumulate that information? What does it mean? How do we weigh it against other kinds of information? And this, I think, is a third pathology in our profession. We would never find ourselves under these circumstances if we were in an engineering firm that performed well, or if we were in a hospital that performed well. We might find it in a case where we were in a bad performing hospital. But if we were in an engineering firm, we wouldn't say it's a deal breaker. The people with the power are using a number to try and describe me, therefore I'm not going to talk to them about it. I'm going to let them make the rule in my absence. We've got to get ourselves past the point as a profession where we see ourselves as labor versus management and get to a point where what we're doing is saying, how can we use information, including information about what we accomplish as teachers, improving the learning lives of our kids. And we got to go one step further. I mean, I think this is really important. Large-scale test data teaches us stuff. It doesn't teach us everything. So we have to put that on the table with other information. And we can't throw it out. So the question we need to ask ourselves is, how can we keep it on there and use it to inform a wise decision? Ultimately, to get there, we as a profession have to have faith in ourselves to be wise decision makers. something I find pathologically lacking in this profession in which we trust our nation's children. Yikes. Yikes.
If I could just add, though, I do think, I agree with you, Brad, but I will say that I think there's a chicken or egg, maybe this is the pathology, where
Yes.
if you have a workforce of 3+ million people that don't feel a level of security, and they don't feel as though they're professionals and don't feel, and particularly now, right, the context now is teachers being laid off. That's what's in the news now, right? So when you feel a little insecure at that level, and you feel as though your profession is not treated as such, then there's vulnerability in that.
Okay, so
let me finish.
Okay.
So, in order to get past that, I would say pushing through. 50% doesn't sound like a lot to me, actually.
Okay.
You know, but I'm not sitting in a classroom and I don't feel that level of insecurity or lack of professionalism. I mean, so I sort of grapple with this myself, because on the one hand, I do feel like, if you look at surveys of teachers, even on unions, they'll say, yeah, well, we think the union's important. Even our youngest Teach for America teachers will say, well, unions matter. And why do they matter? They matter because bread and butter, job security, protect us, right? So on the one hand, I hear that. On the other hand, 50%, that's half, and it's an attempt to look at as objectively as possible what we know about what your students are learning. So, I mean, I'm not sure, I hear both sides, and I think the 50% is probably not the problem, because 51 and 49% are not really statistically significant differences, but somehow with signals quite a difference. If you say 49% versus 51, you can get people to switch sides based on that. So I think the percentage is actually not the point, but I do take your point.
And yet, but still, I can see a teacher, let's take a theoretical teacher, right, who aces the 50% that is not based on standardized test scores, and yet is teaching her students skills that are not either tested on the exam or move beyond the exam, or her students, particularly say in some of the urban DC schools, have such situations whereby their external circumstances affect their testing performance.
Or when you have students that they come into your classroom extremely below grade level and you bring them up to grade level, but they still don't pass those standardized tests.
So let me come at this from a practical, not a theoretical angle, okay? Because the problem is when we talk about these things as theories, they are so abstract that you can force them into positions that are irrational, okay? Practical example number one. The decision matrix that's employed by policy in the New Haven public school system actually makes the circumstance that you've described impossible, okay? I don't know the decision matrices in DC public schools as well because I haven't seen them, but what happened there was the adults sat down and said, that is something worth considering. Let's make sure it doesn't happen. And so 50% means something in New Haven public schools, or it actually doesn't because New Haven public schools doesn't strike a number. But quantity means something, and yet they avoid the worst fear you're describing. And your worst fear is legitimate too. And in fact, when we started working on the professional compensation system for teachers in Denver, it was the administration in Denver public schools who said, let's pay teachers based on the improvement of the proficiency ratings of their students. Well, this is crazy, okay? If I've got a group of fourth graders in 1999 when we started, and they're 18% proficient, and we changed the boundaries of the school, and next year 92% are proficient, why should I get a pay raise? Okay, we shouldn't. So what we did in Denver public schools, we said, let's avoid that worst fear. Let's stop paying people based on proficiency ratings. That's a terrible idea. Let's pay people based on how much children learn. And what that did, and incidentally, it was the union that made that demand.